Welcome to Unit 8, Assignment 5 lesson on quadratic equations. Our last lesson, Assignment 4, was on quadratic expressions. We didn't have any equal signs in there. We didn't have anything we had to solve. We just did our factoring and we were able to walk away. With quadratic equations, we're going to have it equal to 0, or we need to get it equal to 0 so we can factor and find solutions. Problems 1 and 2 on your Assignment 5 worksheet, you're going to want to see Unit 8, Assignment 3. It's the same thing as those type of problems. Here we start to tie everything in together that we've been working on all unit. So if you have a question on how to do 1 and 2, see Unit 8, Assignment 3, look at your worksheet or look at the old videos. Then when you get down to problem 3, it says a squared plus 5a plus 4 equals 0. So first we need to factor and then use our zero product property to go ahead and solve. So we know when we factor, since it's got a squared, we're going to have a here and an a here to begin both binomials. Since both of these are positive, I know I'm going to have a positive and a positive. To figure out what terms go in there, that's why we would do one of those extra diamonds. And I'd say, all right, when I add them together, I'm getting a 5. When I'm multiplying together, I get a 4. So what could my two terms be? So I think what are the things, the factors of 4, that's 1 times 4, 2 times 2. So which of these, when I add them together, which factor pairs of 4, when I add them together, do I get that 5? It's going to be that one. So I know my terms here are 1 and 4, which means my terms here are 1 and 4. And again, if you are wanting to check that, you can do your distribution and combine like terms to see that you're getting back to that original equation. So we've got a plus 1 and a plus 4, and that's all going to equal 0. And so on yesterday's assignment, we could stop here. On assignment 4, we could stop here, but now we need to go ahead and separate these like we did on the zero product property worksheet. Because if this stuff times this stuff equals 0, I either know this stuff has to equal 0, or this stuff, this binomial, is going to have to equal 0. So you go ahead and set a plus 1, set this binomial equal to 0, and this one equal to 0, and then solve each one for a. See, and subtract 1 from both sides, so you get a equals -1. Here you need to subtract 4 from both sides of your equal sign, so you get a equals -4. Okay, so those are your answers, and they might look like that depending on which worksheet the answers are from. Okay. All right, so that is problem 3 from your worksheet. Let me do a couple more problems. Let's take a look at problem number 5. Problem 5 from your worksheet is k squared minus 3k minus 4 equals 0. Let me double check to make sure I wrote it down correctly, or else it's useless. Okay. So again, first we're going to factor this trinomial, factor this quadratic equation. And let's see, it's got a k squared, so I know I'm going to have a k here, a k there. It says a minus and a minus, so I got to be careful, make sure we're careful when we find our factors. When I multiply together, they should be -4. When I add them together, I should get that -3. All right, so now I've got to find those factors of 4. I've got 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. Factors of -4 that add sum to a negative number. If it sums to a negative, I know my biggest factor is going to be negative. All right, so I take a look at these and see which ones are going to go ahead and add to -3. And let's see, +1 plus -4. It's going to be that. I didn't realize how close it was to that other problem that I chose. That's kind of funny. So I've got a 1, a +1, and a -4. All right, when I multiply them together, it gives me -4. When I add them together, it gives me that -3. So my factors are +1 and -4. Okay, so we've done the factoring just like on assignment 4's worksheet. Now we need to do the solving. So if this binomial times this binomial equals 0, I know either this binomial has to equal 0 or that binomial has to equal 0. So just go ahead and set them equal to 0 and solve. So subtract 1 from each side, so we get k equals -1 on that side. add 4 to both sides, add 4. K equals a positive 4. All right, so that is our solution. Okay, I feel like I should ask if anybody has any questions right now, like if I were doing it in the classroom, but if you have questions, you're going to have to email or text them. All right, let's take a look at problem 7. I like to do a few of these just because it gives you a chance to see how to deal with the different positives and negatives. So we've got x squared plus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Okay, so at least we're dealing with different numbers than we had in the last 2 problems. So we know we're going to need to break these down into their binomial factors. And I know I'm going to have an x there and an x there. This is negative, and that's positive. So my product is negative. My sum is positive. So I know when I multiply these 2 numbers together, I'm getting a negative. So at least one of them, and just one of them, is going to be negative. And the other will be positive. And since this sign is positive, it tells me my biggest factor is going to be positive. So let's take a look. What are the factors of 35? I've got 1 times 35, 2, 3, 4, and I've got 5 times 7. And since this is positive, it tells me my biggest factors will be positive, so my smaller ones will be negative. So which of these factors, factor pairs, when I add them together, I get a 2. It's going to be that factor pair. So I've got a -5 and a 7 go in our x there. And it also goes this way, -5 and a +7. So we've done the factoring correctly, and that part's done. Now we move on to solving using the zero product property rule. So I know that this binomial, x minus 5, could equal 0. So I set that binomial equal to 0. You know, this binomial could equal 0. So I'm going to set that equal to 0. Then solve. So I add 5 to both sides. I get x equals 5. And solve on this one. I need to subtract 7 from both sides. So I get x equals -7. It could also be written out like this. Okay. All right. Let's do one more where it doesn't have it equal to 0. One more problem where it doesn't start out equaling to 0. So let's take a look at problem 11. Problem 11 is a squared minus 5a equals -6. So I need to go ahead and add, I need to make it so that one side equals 0. So to make it so this side equals 0, it's got a -6, so I need to add 6 to both sides. Okay, and so on this side, -6 plus 6, I am getting a 0. This 6 can't be added to either of these 2 terms. It's not like terms with this one, it's not like terms with that one, because it doesn't even have a variable. So it's just going to sit next to them on the line. So we've got a squared minus 5a plus 6 equals 0. So now we have a quadratic equation that's equal to 0, and it looks like it is ready to be factored. So it's ready to be broken down into its factors. Got an a there and an a there, and I need to figure out what those other terms are. And so make one of those. It's going to add to 6. Sorry, it's going to multiply. The product is 6, and our sum is -5. Since when I'm multiplying these 2 terms, I'm getting a positive. When I add them, I'm getting a negative. That tells me that both of these terms must be negative. So I'm going to look at what are the factors of 6. I've got 1 times 6, and we said they're both going to be negative. Or 2 times -3, and I think that's all our factors. Those are our factor pairs. So which pair, when I add them together, gives me that -5? It's the -2 times the -3. So I know I'm getting a -2 and a -3, -2 and -3. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and our factoring is done. So we're going to use our zero product property. This binomial needs to equal 0, or this one needs to equal 0. So a minus 2 equals 0, and a minus 3 equals 0, and solve for a. So this is -2, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides of my equal sign. A equals 2. Here I'm going to add 3 to both sides of my equal sign. A equals 3. Okay, so my answers are 2 and 3. All right. So that is how you use the quadratic equations. Just a step further than yesterday, you need to do the factoring, and then you need to solve for your variable. Remember, if you have questions, you can email or text or join the group help hours. And thanks. Have a good day.